It's a biting cold night. The wind howls through the empty spaces of the medieval castle, its shrill cry rattling the stone walls and sending a chill through the halls. Outside, the snow has begun to fall, a relentless blanket of white that swallows the distant landscape, turning the world into a frozen wasteland. Inside, the flickering light of torches barely cuts through the oppressive darkness, casting long, dancing shadows on the cold stone floors. The hearth, where a fire should be crackling, is but a faint memory, its embers long since extinguished in the face of an early winter's night. The warmth of summer feels like a distant dream, far beyond the reach of these towering walls. As the cold settles deeper into the castle, it becomes clear just how vulnerable these great fortresses were. The stone, though a symbol of strength and defense, offers little comfort in the face of winter's fury. Its massive walls, once designed to repel invaders, now serve to trap the cold inside, intensifying the suffering of those who call this place home. The heavy wooden doors creak under the weight of the wind, their joints groaning as if the very structure of the castle is straining to keep out the elements. There's no escaping the biting air, no place to hide from the chill that penetrates every corner of the stone castle. Life in medieval times was a constant battle against the cold, a war fought not with swords or arrows, but with the essential elements of fire, food, and stone. Each played a crucial role in transforming this fortress from a mere military stronghold into a place of survival, even when winter's grip seemed unyielding. The castle may have been built to withstand attacks, but could it truly withstand the ruthless chill of a northern winter? This is where the story of fire, food, and stone begins, not as mere survival tactics, but as life-giving forces that made the castle a place of refuge, rather than a cold, unwelcoming tomb. The castles of medieval Europe, towering and formidable, were more than just symbols of power and security. They were sanctuaries, offering shelter and warmth to those who sought refuge within their walls. Yet, the winter months were an undeniable challenge. The cold could kill just as easily as any blade or arrow. The fire, food, and stone were more than tools. They were the means by which life persisted through the seasons of despair. As you stand in the great hall of the castle, the wind howling outside seems a distant threat. Inside, however, there is a different story unfolding. The crackling of a large hearth fills the room with a soft warmth, pushing back against the biting cold that tries to force its way in. The fire, glowing with the warmth of burning logs, serves as the heart of the castle, a source of life that drives away the chill and provides not only heat but light and comfort. The warmth from the fire feels like a small miracle in the face of the winter's brutality, a reminder that, even in the harshest of conditions, there is a flicker of hope. The fire was not just a luxury in the medieval world, it was a necessity. Without it, survival in the stone castles would have been near impossible. The castle itself, built of thick stone walls, was designed for defense, its battlements and turrets offering a commanding view of the surrounding countryside. But these same walls, so expertly crafted to protect against invaders, became a prison for the cold. The stone absorbed the winter chill during the night, holding on to it like a cold embrace, only to release it into the castle during the daylight hours. It was the fire that transformed this cold fortress into a livable space, a place where people could gather, eat, and rest in relative comfort. The fire's role in survival cannot be overstated. It provided warmth, yes, but it also served as a gathering point. In the great hall, the fire was the centerpiece, its flames crackling merrily in the hearth, sending warmth throughout the room. The nobility and servants alike would gather around, sharing stories, meals, and warmth. The great hall, with its towering ceilings and long wooden tables, was a place where both the highborn and the lowborn could come together and find a common refuge from the harshness of the outside world. But food was another crucial element. Without food, the people of the castle would not survive the winter, no matter how many fires they lit or how thick the stone walls were. In the cold months, the castle kitchens became the heart of the castle in a different way. The preparation and storage of food were as vital to survival as the fire itself. Winter meals, hearty and filling, were prepared using preserved meats, dried grains, and vegetables that had been harvested and stored during the warmer months. The cold, snowy landscape outside might have been devoid of life, but within the castle's walls, The hearths and kitchens were filled with the scent of roasting meats and baking bread, offering a fleeting sense of warmth and comfort. The stone, while cold and unyielding on the outside, had its own role to play in keeping the inhabitants of the castle alive. The very structure of the castle, its walls, its towers, and its chambers, acted as a buffer between the inhabitants and the harsh world outside. While the stone walls might not have been able to keep out the cold entirely, they did help to maintain a relatively stable temperature within the castle. This meant that, even during the coldest of nights, the inhabitants of the castle could sleep in relative warmth, protected by the thick, solid walls of their home. As the night presses on, the fire continues to burn, its glow flickering in the distance, offering a beacon of safety in the midst of the darkness. The food that was gathered and prepared with care over the previous months will sustain the inhabitants for another long, cold night. The stone walls, though indifferent to the suffering outside, stand firm, providing a sense of security that is perhaps the most valuable asset of all. In this moment, as the cold presses on and the night grows longer, it is clear that survival in a medieval castle during the winter months required more than just a strong fortress. It required fire, food, and stone, the three elements that made the castle a home, even when the world outside seemed uninhabitable. These elements worked together in a delicate balance, each contributing to the survival of those who lived within the castle's walls. Without them, the cold would have been an insurmountable foe, one that could not be fought with strength or courage alone. The fire, food, and stone are not just historical artifacts, they are the lifeblood of survival itself. The castles of the medieval world were more than just structures of defense. They were sanctuaries, havens from the bitter cold, and symbols of the resilience of the human spirit. And so, even as the wind howls outside and the night seems endless, the warmth of the fire, the sustenance of the food, and the protection of the stone will endure, offering a fleeting but powerful glimpse into the ways in which the people of the past fought to survive against the relentless forces of nature. The story of fire, food, and stone is not just a tale of medieval survival. It is a story of the will to endure, of the human instinct to adapt, to find comfort and security even in the harshest of conditions. It is a story that has been told countless times throughout history, across cultures and civilizations, and it is a story that still resonates with us today. The cold may come, but as long as there is fire, food, and stone, there is always hope. The medieval castle, a monumental structure, looms against the bleak winter sky, its tall stone walls standing as silent sentinels. To an outsider, it may appear impregnable, an impenetrable fortress built to endure sieges, protect its inhabitants, and intimidate any would-be invaders. Its towering walls, fortified towers, and battlements evoke a sense of invincibility, an eternal defense against the outside world. But as the first icy gusts of winter sweep across the land, the cold truth becomes clear. The castle is not immune to the elements. Despite its imposing strength, the harsh winter chill can penetrate even its deepest chambers, reminding its residents that survival within these stone walls is never guaranteed. The design of a medieval castle was primarily crafted with defense in mind. Its thick stone walls were meant to protect its inhabitants from arrows, siege engines, and enemy soldiers. Yet, in winter, these very walls became the enemy. The cold, unforgiving winds that howl through the castle's narrow gaps and chimneys carry the sting of the outside world into the very heart of the fortress. Despite the grandeur of the structure and its massive size, the castle, in winter, feels small, cold, and vulnerable. Its towering presence, built to withstand human aggression, struggles to protect against the forces of nature. Inside, the feeling of isolation is immediate. The immense stone walls, which provide such a sense of security from invaders, create a vast, unyielding space that, rather than offering comfort, seems to magnify the harshness of winter's grip. The temperature inside the castle fluctuates depending on where one stands, but overall, it remains uncomfortable and uninviting. The deeper into the castle one moves, the colder it feels, especially in the more distant chambers. There are no central heating systems to warm the rooms, and the flickering hearths in the Great Hall can only do so much to mitigate the biting cold. The stone, which provides insulation during the day, releases the accumulated cold of the night, slowly chilling the interiors, making even the thickest tapestries seem like useless decorations. There is no refuge from the cold in these stone walls, and every room, no matter how grand, seems subject to winter's relentless assault. In the castle's tallest towers, the draft is unbearable. The wind rattles the windows and howls through cracks in the stonework, penetrating the thickest of furs and cloaks. Even the noble inhabitants, who are supposed to be insulated from the hardships of daily life, find themselves struggling to stay warm. The chambers of the lord and lady, though larger and more elaborately decorated, offer little more protection from the cold than the servants' quarters. No matter the luxury of the tapestries or the fine furniture, the cold seeps into every corner. The drafts snake through the walls, making the grandest rooms feel more like prisons than places of comfort. The cold is not merely a physical presence, it is psychological. The dark winter months bring with them a sense of foreboding, an isolation that can be almost suffocating. For those who live in the castle, the winter is a time of anxiety. The days grow shorter, the nights longer, and the threat of the cold seems to tighten its grip with every passing day. The castle's walls, which are supposed to provide a sense of protection, seem to close in, trapping the inhabitants in a cold, dark world. There is no escape, no retreat from the relentless frost that clings to everything. The fire is the only reprieve, the only hope against the cold, but even that is not guaranteed. And yet, despite this, life within the castle carries on. The inhabitants of the castle, from the noble lords to the lowliest servants, continue with their daily routines. The winter might be harsh, but life must go on. The castle is still a place of gathering, of work, and of survival. In many ways, the people inside have become accustomed to the challenges that winter brings. They have learned to adapt to the cold, to work around it, and to endure it. Every day, they rely on a delicate balance of fire, food, and stone to survive the brutal months of winter. The Great Hall, for example, remains the center of activity within the castle, though it is a shadow of its warmer self. The great fireplace, if tended carefully, becomes the focal point of the room. The warmth from the hearth can bring a slight respite from the cold, but the hall's stone walls, once magnificent and majestic, seem to absorb the heat too quickly. There are often layers of warmth near the fire, but as one moves further away, the chill takes over again. The lords, knights, and soldiers gather around the hearth, trying to stay warm while carrying on their duties. Conversations happen in muffled tones, laughter scarce as people are too preoccupied with staying warm. For the servants and workers, winter brings a different set of challenges. They may have little access to the great hall and its warmth, forced to endure the harshest parts of the castle. Their duties, however, don't stop in winter. They are the ones who maintain the fires, stoke the hearths, and bring food from the larder to the kitchen. They are the lifeblood of the castle during these long months. For them, the cold is an ever-present companion, and their work often involves battling against it. The castles were often equipped with storage rooms, or larders, that housed the provisions needed to survive the winter. These rooms, though somewhat insulated from the cold, were by no means warm. They, too, carried the bite of winter, and the workers who had to retrieve food or supplies from these places would often find themselves shivering, their breath visible in the air. The kitchen, where food was prepared, was often located in the heart of the castle, near the Great Hall, but even here, the cold was never far away. The fire in the kitchen was a constant presence, but it could only do so much to fend off the cold outside. Despite all this, the castle's purpose remained clear: survival. The stone walls, though unforgiving, served their purpose, offering protection against both invaders and the harsh winter winds. The fire, though fleeting, provided warmth and comfort in an otherwise inhospitable place. And the food, carefully stored and rationed, ensured that no one would go hungry during the worst of the cold. Together, these three elements, stone, fire, and food, formed the backbone of the castle's survival strategy. Without them, the fortress would have been nothing more than a cold, hollow shell, vulnerable to the harsh realities of the winter months. As the days pass, the castle endures. The cold may be oppressive, the challenges many, but the people within the fortress find a way to carry on. They continue to rely on the strength of the stone, the warmth of the fire, and the sustenance of their provisions to navigate the harshest season of the year. The castle, in its stoic grandeur, may be built for defense, but it is also a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. Even in the face of winter's unrelenting grip, the castle remains a place of life, a place where, despite everything, survival is still possible. Winter may turn the castle into a fortress of cold and isolation, but it is also a place where community is forged, where bonds are strengthened, and where survival is always possible, so long as the fire burns, the food lasts, and the stone stands firm. As the cold winds howl through the stone walls of the castle, there is one thing that stands between the inhabitants and the deadly chill of winter: fire. It is more than just a source of warmth. Fire is the lifeblood of the medieval castle, the heart that keeps the fortress alive in the harshest of seasons. The fire not only provides heat, but it is a symbol of survival, a force that pushes back the darkness and cold, offering both comfort and protection. In a time where the cold could kill just as easily as an enemy's sword, fire was essential. The castles, with their towering stone walls and cold, drafty halls, were designed for defense, not comfort. The thick stone that made the castle so strong as a fortress also made it inhospitable during the winter months. The stone walls absorbed the cold and held it inside, turning the castle into a kind of frozen fortress, where even the nobility could be at the mercy of winter's biting winds. But fire was a constant presence, a source of warmth and life in a world where the cold threatened to take everything away. The fire, once lit, becomes the center of the castle. In the Great Hall, the hearth is the focal point, a massive stone structure that serves as both the physical and metaphorical heart of the castle. The fire roars within, its flames flickering and crackling, sending waves of warmth out into the room. The noble families, the knights, the servants, they all gather around the fire, huddling close to its comforting warmth. The fire is what allows them to exist within the stone fortress, to endure the harshness of the winter months. Without it, survival would be unimaginable. The hearth itself is a marvel of medieval engineering. It is often built into the very structure of the castle, with flues designed to draw smoke away from the room and ensure the air remains breathable. The fire in the hearth is fed by logs, kindling, and, in some cases, animal fat or peat, materials that burn slowly and provide a steady source of warmth. But the fire is not just for warmth. It is also a place for cooking, for light, and for socialization. It is where meals are prepared, where stories are shared, and where decisions are made. The fire is the gathering place, the heart that keeps the castle alive. For the people of the castle, the fire is a constant companion. The noble families depend on it to keep their chambers warm, to heat the water for baths, and to cook the meals that will sustain them through the long winter months. But for the servants, the fire is just as important, if not more so. They are the ones who stoke the flames, who ensure the hearths are always burning, who keep the fire alive. They are the ones who work tirelessly, day and night, to ensure that the warmth of the fire never fades. The fire in the kitchen, too, is vital, where large pots of stew and roasts are simmering over open flames, feeding the castle's inhabitants. The workers, often the first to rise in the morning and the last to sleep at night, make sure the fires are kept alive, ensuring that everyone in the castle is fed and warm. But even with the fire's crucial role, it is not an easy task to maintain it. During the winter, the supply of wood becomes a constant concern. Castles were often situated in isolated locations, far from the nearest village or town, which meant that firewood had to be gathered and stored in advance. It was a labor-intensive task to cut and stack enough wood to get through the long, cold months. Even in the castle, where the lord's wealth and power provided the means to acquire more resources, firewood was still precious. Every log that was burned was carefully rationed, ensuring that it would last through the entire winter. The fire itself had to be carefully tended to, ensuring that it never went out. The servants and staff spent long hours maintaining the hearths, adding logs and kindling as needed, stoking the flames and making sure the fire never faltered. Yet, the fire's role in the castle extended beyond just warmth and sustenance. It was also a beacon of hope. The fire illuminated the castle, casting long shadows on the stone walls and filling the space with a soft, flickering glow. The fire in the Great Hall was especially important, providing light in a world where darkness could be suffocating. Without the fire, the halls would be swallowed by the night, and the cold would be all-encompassing. The fire represented life itself, its light and warmth a reminder that, despite the isolation of winter, there was still comfort to be found in the castle's walls. But fire, like any powerful force, could also be dangerous. A single misstep, a spark in the wrong place, could quickly turn the castle into an inferno. Castles, with their wooden floors and thatched roofs, were particularly susceptible to fire. A careless flame or an untended hearth could destroy everything in its path. The risk of fire was always present, but it was a risk that the people of the castle were willing to take, for without it, they would be left to suffer the ravages of winter with nothing but cold stone to surround them. The warmth of the fire was worth the risk. And yet, despite the danger, the fire was seen as a life-giving force. It was a symbol of resilience, of the human ability to adapt and endure. The fire, burning brightly in the hearth, represented the strength of the castle's inhabitants. It was not just a source of physical warmth, but an emotional and spiritual one as well. The fire was a communal space, where people gathered together to share stories, to relax after a long day, and to celebrate life in the face of winter's hardships. It was a place where relationships were formed, where bonds were strengthened, and where the castle's inhabitants could find solace in each other's company. Without fire, the castle would be nothing more than a cold, empty shell, a monument to human achievement that offered no warmth, no comfort, and no sense of safety. The fire was what made the castle a home. It was the heartbeat of the fortress, pulsing with life in the midst of the cold, unfeeling stone. The fire was both a necessity and a luxury, a tool for survival and a source of joy. It was the force that allowed life to continue within the castle's walls, the one element that could turn a frozen fortress into a place of refuge. The fire, though it may flicker and wane, always had the power to reignite. And in that moment, as the flames once again surged into the air, the castle came alive again, breathing warmth into every room, filling the castle with life. It was a constant reminder that, even in the coldest, most unforgiving seasons, there was always the chance to reignite, to survive, and to endure. For the people of the castle, fire was not just an element. It was their hope, their resilience, and their very survival. The fire in the hearth is not just a lifeline against the cold, it is the beating heart of the castle, drawing everyone into its warmth and light. The great hall, which echoes with the sounds of life and activity, is transformed by the fire. The castle, once a cold and imposing fortress, now feels like a home, alive with conversation, laughter, and the hum of daily routines. As the fire crackles and pops, it draws the castle's inhabitants together, breaking down the walls of hierarchy and creating a communal space where bonds are forged. In the medieval world, where survival depended on strength, community, and cooperation, the fire became more than just a physical necessity. It became a symbol of unity, a place where people, nobles and servants alike, could gather and share in the warmth of the moment. The fire offered a brief reprieve from the isolation of the winter months, a rare and valuable chance for social interaction in an otherwise structured and often hierarchical society. The great hall, with its towering ceilings and long wooden tables, was where the magic of the fireside gatherings unfolded. The lord of the castle, his family, knights, and guests would sit at the head of the table, while the servants, soldiers, and laborers would take their place further away from the hearth. But despite the social distance, the fire served to bring them all into one shared space, united by the essential warmth that only it could provide. Here, the fire became the great equalizer, even if only for a moment. While the lord and his family dined on roasted meats, fresh bread, and fine wines, the rest of the castle's inhabitants, though separated by rank, shared the warmth of the flames. The heat of the fire seeped into their bones, a comfort that transcended class. It was a place where the nobility, despite their elevated status, could find solace in the flickering light, where the servants, despite their hard labor, could rest their weary limbs and gather in the shared moment of warmth. And yet, the fire served a practical purpose beyond its role as a gathering point. It was the center of daily life in the castle. As the flames danced in the hearth, the practical rhythms of castle life continued around it. The fire was used not only for cooking but for drying clothes, warming blankets, and boiling water for washing. It was at the fire that the castle's inhabitants prepared the food that would sustain them through the cold months. The scent of roasting meats, fresh-baked bread, and hearty stews filled the air, creating an atmosphere of comfort and sustenance. It was a time of nourishment, both physical and emotional, as the inhabitants gathered around the fire to share their meals and stories. The fire, however, was not just about comfort and warmth, it was also a place for decision-making. In the medieval world, where communication could be slow and distant, the fireside served as the gathering point for discussions of great importance. Lords and knights would discuss matters of strategy, politics, and war, often making key decisions by the warmth of the fire. It was here, by the crackling hearth, that the most important affairs of the castle were debated and decided. The fire became the backdrop for these weighty conversations, its flickering flames providing a sense of urgency, a constant reminder that time was passing and decisions needed to be made. This practical, decision-making aspect of the fireside gathering was particularly significant during the winter months. With the outside world blanketed in snow and the threat of raids or sieges always looming, the fire in the Great Hall became the setting for crucial talks about defense, resource management, and survival. The Lord would confer with his knights and advisors, discussing strategies for the coming months, planning for potential attacks, or organizing the defense of the castle. The warmth of the fire and the camaraderie it provided helped the lords and their soldiers to bond, to prepare mentally and physically for the challenges ahead. It was not just the lords and knights who gathered around the fire, though. The servants, too, would find moments of respite in its warmth. They, too, had a role to play in these gatherings. After long hours of work, they would gather by the fire to warm their hands, share stories, and enjoy a brief moment of relaxation. The fire, for them, was a brief escape from the drudgery of their daily tasks. It allowed them to connect with others, to share in the warmth of community. The hearth was a shared space where the servant and the lord, the soldier and the squire, could all find a moment of human connection. As the fire crackled and the night wore on, the social aspects of the fireside gathering became even more pronounced. The great hall, bathed in the soft golden glow of the flames, would be filled with the sounds of conversation, music, and laughter. The firelight illuminated the faces of those gathered, casting their features in a warm, inviting light. The shadows of the castle, so often cold and oppressive, became softened and warm, as if the fire itself could chase away the darkness. It was a time for stories to be told, for songs to be sung, for relationships to be forged and strengthened. The fire created an atmosphere of intimacy, a sense of belonging, and a shared purpose. Children would listen to the stories of their elders, tales of heroes, kings, and battles, passed down from one generation to the next. The fire became the storyteller's stage, its flames dancing in time with the rhythm of the tale. These stories were more than just entertainment. They were the threads that wove the fabric of the castle's culture and identity. The fire, once a simple source of warmth, became a symbol of continuity, of tradition, of shared memory. But as the night wore on and the fire began to die down, the sense of togetherness would slowly fade. The castle's inhabitants, one by one, would retire to their chambers, leaving the warmth of the hearth behind. The servants would go to their quarters, the lords to their private rooms, and the knights to their barracks. Yet, the sense of unity that the fire had kindled would remain, a quiet ember in the hearts of all who had gathered. The fire had done its work, it had brought people together, had provided warmth and sustenance, and had created a sense of community in a world where survival often depended on isolation and distance. In the morning, the fire would again be rekindled, its warmth drawing the castle's inhabitants back to the great hall. The cycle would continue, day after day, as the castle's inhabitants relied on the fire to navigate the challenges of the winter months. The fire was not just a source of physical warmth, it was a force that shaped the castle's social life, that created connections, that provided both the practical and emotional sustenance needed to survive. The fireside gathering was more than just a winter ritual, it was the lifeblood of the castle, a symbol of resilience and community in the face of the cold. The fire, which had once been a simple tool for survival, became something far more profound, a place where bonds were forged, where decisions were made, and where the warmth of the human spirit could endure even in the coldest of times. Food, in the cold grip of winter, was not just a luxury, it was the very foundation of survival within the castle walls. The temperature outside may have plunged to freezing, the winds howling across the land and turning the world into a frozen wasteland, but inside the castle, the warmth of food was the one thing that could offer a semblance of comfort. It was the kind of warmth that reached beyond the physical, offering a psychological reprieve from the isolation and harshness of the long winter months. As the hearths crackled and the fires burned, the smell of hearty stews, roasting meats, and fresh-baked bread filled the air. The great hall was filled with the sights and sounds of sustenance being prepared. It was not just a time for nourishment, it was a time to come together, to share not just food, but the communal act of survival. The kitchen, often a chaotic and bustling place, was the lifeblood of the castle. This is where food was stored, prepared, and cooked for the entire castle. The food that made its way to the great hall would sustain everyone, from the nobility at the head of the table to the servants who worked tirelessly behind the scenes. During winter, food was more than just a source of energy, it was the bridge between life and death. The long, dark months of the year meant that provisions had to be carefully stored and preserved to last. The harvests from the fall, carefully gathered and packed away, were the key to survival. It was an intricate and delicate system of preservation, meats salted and smoked, vegetables dried or pickled, grains stored in barrels. Every morsel of food had to be treated with care, as no one knew how long the harsh winter would last or what might happen if the supplies ran low. The castle's larder was packed with these carefully prepared provisions, ready to be brought out when needed most. The kitchen was a place of constant activity. The fire in the hearth crackled day and night, providing both light and heat to cook the food. Meat, especially pork, beef, and venison, was often slow-cooked over the flames, turning tender and rich with flavor. Large pots of stews were simmered for hours, with roots, herbs, and salted meats combined to create a warming meal for the inhabitants. Bread was kneaded and baked in stone ovens, filling the air with a comforting aroma. On feast days, the kitchen worked overtime to prepare grand spreads of roasted game, pies, and pastries. But even on ordinary days, the food was hearty and satisfying. For the inhabitants of the castle, the act of preparing and eating food became an important ritual, one that was central to both survival and social connection. It was not just about eating for sustenance. The act of eating together, gathered around the fire in the great hall, was a moment to share stories, to bond, and to regroup. For the noble families, it was a time to discuss matters of importance, strategy, alliances, and the daily affairs of the castle. For the soldiers and knights, it was a time to relax, share their experiences, and refuel after a long day's work. And for the servants and workers, it was a brief but cherished moment of respite, where they could step away from their exhausting duties and join in the communal act of eating. The kitchen staff worked tirelessly, but at the end of the day, they too would gather around the fire, sharing whatever scraps or leftovers they had. The food, of course, had to be rationed carefully. Even in the castle, where wealth and power were in abundance, resources were finite. The rich feasts of summer had to be tempered by the limited stores of winter. The salt-preserved meats and dried fruits might not have been as luxurious as the fresh produce of summer, but they were enough to sustain the castle's inhabitants. Each meal became an exercise in balance, ensuring that everyone had enough to eat without running out before the thawing of spring. The noble family might have had access to the finest cuts of meat, but they too had to rely on the stores of the castle's food reserves, carefully managing their supplies for the long months ahead. The larder was an organized chaos of barrels, sacks, and crates, each holding a different type of preserved food. The storage techniques used to keep food from spoiling were essential during the winter months. Salted meats, hanging in the cool stone rooms, would keep for months. Dried herbs and vegetables were stored in jars and sacks, waiting to be used in stews and soups. Grains, essential for making bread and porridge, were carefully measured and stored in barrels, where they would stay dry and safe from pests. In some castles, there were even underground cellars where perishables could be kept at a consistent, cool temperature, slowing the decay process. Despite all the careful planning and preparation, food was never guaranteed. The weather could be unpredictable, and so could the quality of the harvest. The uncertainty of winter meant that the larder could run low, and when that happened, the inhabitants of the castle would have to make do with what little they had. In times of scarcity, the kitchen would resort to more basic meals: porridge, gruel, and thin stews made from the bones of meat long past its prime. But even in these leaner times, the food was crafted with care. The kitchen staff would stretch every last morsel, ensuring that every bit of food was used to its fullest potential. Nothing was wasted. Bones were boiled for stock, scraps were turned into soups, and even the smallest scraps of bread were dried and saved for use in puddings or as a meal for the dogs. The castle's food system was a constant reminder of the delicate balance required for survival in the medieval world. It was not enough to simply have food; it had to be managed, preserved, and shared. Every meal was a testament to the work and effort that went into securing survival during the coldest months. In a world where famine could strike at any time, where the weather could destroy crops and disrupt trade, the castle's larder was a symbol of the inhabitants' resilience and resourcefulness. As the fire crackled and the food was served, the castle's inhabitants were reminded that survival was a collective effort. It was the work of the farmers who grew the crops, the hunters who brought in game, the cooks who prepared the meals, and the servants who carried them to the tables. Food was the one thing that could unite everyone in the castle, regardless of their rank or role. It was the foundation of their shared experience, the one thing that kept them going through the long, harsh winter. The meal was not just a time to eat. It was a time to remember that, despite the cold and the isolation, they were in this together. Food, in the end, was not just a source of physical strength. It was a source of emotional and psychological resilience. It was a reminder that, no matter how cold the night or how harsh the winds, there was warmth to be found within the castle walls. It was a reminder that, even in the darkest of times, there would always be the fire, the food, and the shared community to keep them going. In a world that was often uncertain and unforgiving, food was the anchor that kept them grounded and connected to each other. The stone walls of the medieval castle stand as a testament to human ingenuity and determination, their sheer mass and solidity a reminder of the effort it took to create a safe haven in a harsh and unforgiving world. While the fire provided warmth and food brought sustenance, it was the stone, the unyielding stone, that formed the backbone of the castle's survival. The walls, thick and imposing, held the promise of security in a world that could be as dangerous as it was unpredictable. But in the winter months, when the winds howled and the snow piled up, these very stone walls became a double-edged sword. While they offered protection from human invaders, they also trapped the cold within, adding to the castle's unrelenting chill. Nevertheless, the stone was indispensable to survival, both as a defense and a shelter, allowing the castle and its people to endure the bleakest months of the year. At first glance, the castle's stone walls might seem like a cold and impassable barrier. And indeed, the cold of winter could seep into every crack, crevice, and corner, intensifying the suffering of those who sought refuge within. The heavy stonework, designed to withstand siege weapons and battering rams, was unyielding to the warmth of fire, often trapping the cold air within. Even though the hearths and kitchens offered heat, the stone's capacity to absorb and retain the chill of the outside world meant that, without careful management, the interior of the castle could become as cold as the world beyond its walls. Still, the stone remained the castle's greatest asset. The role of stone in the construction of the medieval castle went far beyond mere aesthetics or defense. It was the foundation upon which everything else stood, the material that could make or break the survival of the people within. Without the stone walls, the fire would have been powerless to ward off the cold. Without the stone floors, the food and warmth from the hearth would have dissipated into the air. Stone was the unspoken hero of the castle, the silent force that worked in tandem with fire and food to protect and preserve life. Building a castle was a monumental task, one that required not just skilled labor but a deep understanding of the elements and how to work with them. The choice of stone itself was critical. Local quarries provided the material, which was then shaped and cut by masons who worked with incredible precision. The stones were often rough-hewn, but the sheer weight of each block made it nearly impossible for invaders to breach the walls. The construction of such a fortress could take decades, but once completed, the The castle stood as a fortress against both human enemies and the unforgiving forces of nature. In the winter, the castle's stone structure provided protection from the elements. While the cold might have seeped into the castle's interior, the thick stone walls kept the warmth from escaping too quickly. The same massive walls that made it difficult for invaders to penetrate the castle's defenses also worked to keep the temperature inside more stable than the wild, unpredictable changes outside. The stone acted as a thermal mass, absorbing the heat from the fire and slowly releasing it back into the rooms, creating a buffer against the worst of the cold. Though it was never warm enough to be truly comfortable, the stone walls offered a degree of insulation, preventing the worst of the chill from overtaking the castle. In addition to its defensive properties, the stone also provided a level of structural integrity that was essential for survival. The weight and strength of the stone made the castle a formidable structure, able to withstand storms, attacks, and the elements alike. Even in the face of heavy snow and ice, the stone walls stood firm. The roof, often covered in thatch or wooden shingles, might collapse under the weight of heavy snow, but the stone walls would remain, offering a measure of safety and protection. However, it wasn't just the outer walls that were essential. The internal structure of the castle, its towers, its keep, its inner courtyards, was built with the same precision and attention to detail. The keep, the central stronghold of the castle, was often the most heavily fortified part of the entire structure. Built with thick stone walls and narrow windows, it was designed to withstand even the most determined siege. Inside, it housed the lord and his family, and during winter, it became the safest place in the entire fortress. The stone walls of the keep were thick enough to provide a small degree of warmth from the fires that burned within. The keep was the heart of the castle, both figuratively and physically, and it was here that people could find the most protection from the elements. Beyond its role as a fortress against the cold, the stone also helped to maintain a sense of order and hierarchy within the castle. The design of the castle was such that each room, each tower, and each hall had its place. The lord and his family resided in the upper chambers, where the heat from the fires could more easily rise to warm them. The lower levels, where the servants, soldiers, and workers spent most of their time, were colder and less well insulated. This hierarchical use of space, while ensuring that the nobility enjoyed some protection from the worst of the cold, also highlighted the way in which society was organized in the medieval period. Even in the most basic aspects of life, such as warmth and shelter, the differences between the upper and lower classes were made clear. In addition to the basic survival needs, the castle's stone structure also provided a sense of stability and security. The castle was more than just a place to sleep or eat, it was a symbol of power and permanence. For the lord and his family, the castle represented not just a physical structure but a claim to land, wealth, and status. The stone walls were a visible declaration of their authority, and the fortress itself stood as a constant reminder of their ability to withstand the harshest challenges. The castle's stone was not just about defense, though, it also acted as a source of psychological protection. The very presence of the stone walls could offer a sense of security during the cold, dark months of winter. As the winds howled outside and the snow piled up, the people inside the castle could take solace in the strength of the stone. It was a shield, not only from the cold but also from the uncertainty and dangers that lurked beyond the walls. Inside the castle, behind the stone walls, life was more predictable, more secure. The stone was a constant, unwavering presence in a world that was anything but. Yet, the stone's role in survival was not without its challenges. While it helped to keep the castle standing and provided a degree of protection, it was not a perfect solution. The cold still crept into every corner of the building, and the stone itself, despite its strength, could not keep out the elements entirely. The constant need to keep the fire burning, to maintain the food supplies, and to find ways to insulate the cold was an ongoing struggle. But, in the end, the stone served its purpose, providing both physical and emotional protection to the castle's inhabitants. It was the anchor that held the entire structure together, the solid foundation upon which everything else depended. The castle's stone, though cold and immovable, was not a barrier to life. It was the very structure that allowed life to continue. It was the strength that held the castle together in the face of winter's fury, and it was the foundation that allowed the fire to burn and the food to be prepared. In a world where survival often depended on strength, resilience, and adaptation, the stone walls were the perfect metaphor for the human spirit, enduring, unwavering, and ever-present in the face of adversity. Survival in the medieval castle was not left to chance. The harsh winters, unpredictable and unforgiving, required careful, methodical preparation. For the inhabitants of the castle, the work of enduring the cold and surviving the long months of winter began long before the first snowfall touched the earth. It was the meticulous planning, the foresight, and the anticipation of needs that separated those who thrived from those who perished. Each season, every lord, every knight, and even the lowliest servant knew that survival depended on more than just fire, food, and stone. It was about preparation, the unseen work that took place long before the frost had a chance to claim its toll. In the autumn, as the last of the harvests were gathered, the castle's inhabitants began their work of ensuring that every resource was stored and preserved for the long winter ahead. The fields and farms surrounding the castle, vital to its survival, were harvested with an eye toward winter's demands. Grains, fruits, and vegetables had to be gathered, dried, and stored in the larders, ensuring that there would be enough food to sustain everyone. Meat, too, was preserved either by salting, smoking, or drying, so that it could be stored for months without spoiling. The scent of curing ham, sausages, and salted fish filled the air as the preparations began in earnest. The cold weather, though harsh, helped to preserve the food, but careful attention had to be paid to ensure that nothing went to waste. The castle's granaries and cellars, usually located in the deepest parts of the castle to remain cool, were stocked with provisions. Grains like wheat, barley, and oats were kept in barrels, where they would stay dry and safe from the elements. Similarly, vegetables like onions, carrots, and turnips were carefully stored, often buried in the earth or kept in dark, cool storage rooms to preserve their freshness. Fruits, especially apples and pears, were dried or turned into preserves, while cheeses and dairy products were either smoked or salted to prolong their shelf life. The entire castle, from the kitchens to the servants' quarters, became an ongoing hub of activity as food was prepared for the long months ahead. But it wasn't just food that had to be carefully prepared. The castle's inhabitants also had to ensure that the firewood necessary to keep the hearths burning was gathered and stored. Wood was essential in a world where fire was the only form of heat. The castle's woodworkers and servants worked tirelessly, cutting, chopping, and stacking firewood in neat piles to ensure that the fires would burn continuously throughout the winter. Wood had to be seasoned properly, so it would burn efficiently and not produce excess smoke. The wood itself was stored in sheltered areas, away from the elements that might dampen it. For the castle's inhabitants, there was no such thing as too much firewood. It was an investment in their survival, a measure of comfort during the coldest months of the year. The roofs and walls, too, were inspected and reinforced before the winter arrived. Though stone made up the bulk of the castle's structure, other materials, wood, thatch, and plaster, were susceptible to the harsh winter weather. The roofs were checked for leaks and potential weaknesses, as snow and ice could cause them to collapse if not maintained. The windows, often narrow and made of glass or wood, were inspected to ensure that they were sealed tightly to keep the cold winds from infiltrating the castle. Any cracks in the walls or leaks in the floors were patched up, ensuring that the castle would remain as secure and insulated as possible. The process was arduous, but absolutely necessary. Without these preventive measures, even the strongest fortress could be undone by the power of nature. Another crucial aspect of preparation was the stockpiling of materials needed to sustain life in the castle. A fortress was, after all, a place not just for defense, but for long-term survival. The castle's blacksmiths and craftsmen worked to ensure that the weapons, tools, and other essential items were in good condition. Iron and steel were forged into axes, swords, and plows, ready for whatever tasks might come in the months ahead. Spades and shovels were sharpened, and tools for maintaining the castle's defenses were double-checked to ensure their readiness. No one knew what the coming months would bring, but preparation ensured that the castle was ready for any eventuality, whether it be a siege, a raid, or simply the challenges of living through a harsh winter. The planning for winter didn't end with food and firewood. The castle's security, too, was part of the overall preparation. In the colder months, the threat of raids and attacks was ever present. A castle, isolated and often surrounded by wilderness, could easily become a target for marauders, who knew that the inhabitants of the fortress might be weakened or vulnerable. To prepare for such possibilities, the castle's guards and soldiers were trained to deal with the harsh conditions of winter. The gates were reinforced, the drawbridge checked, and the walls patrolled to ensure that any signs of trouble could be dealt with quickly and decisively. Watchtowers were manned, and the men tasked with guarding the castle were given extra rations to keep them strong and alert. But preparation didn't stop with the physical aspects of the castle. It extended to the mindset of its inhabitants. The harshness of winter had a psychological impact, especially in a place as isolated as a medieval castle. The long nights, the isolation from the outside world, and the endless cold could wear down the spirits of even the strongest warriors. Knowing this, the lord of the castle and his family ensured that morale was maintained even in the darkest months of the year. There were feasts to be held, songs to be sung, and stories to be told around the fire. The communal gathering at the hearth, the shared meal, and the close-knit nature of the castle's inhabitants all helped to ward off the isolation that could so easily lead to despair. It was the human element, friendship, camaraderie, and shared experience that made survival not just possible but bearable. The servants and lower-ranking individuals in the castle were often the unsung heroes of winter preparation. While the noble families were largely shielded from the hardest work, it was the labor of the castle's workers that made survival possible. The servants were tasked with everything from cleaning the stables to gathering firewood, from ensuring that the larder was properly stocked to tending the animals that would provide food. Their efforts, though largely invisible to the lords and ladies of the castle, were critical. It was through their tireless work that the preparations for winter went off without a hitch. Without them, the castle would have faltered. Ultimately, preparation was the key to survival in the medieval castle. It was the planning, the gathering, the securing of resources, and the fortification of the castle that ensured the inhabitants were able to endure the harsh winter. Each action, from the food stored in the larder to the wood piled outside, from the repairs made to the castle's walls to the mental preparation of its inhabitants, played a crucial role. The work was exhausting, tedious, and seemingly never-ending, but without it, survival would have been uncertain at best. The preparation was a mark of foresight and resilience, a demonstration that, even in the face of the harshest conditions, the castle and its people were ready to endure. The medieval castle was not merely a structure of stone and mortar, it was a fortress built on the foundation of preparation. The medieval castle, though a powerful structure of stone and strength, was not immune to the forces of nature. Its very location often dictated its survival, as the castle's inhabitants were inextricably linked to the land around them. The surrounding environment, with its unpredictable seasons, shifting winds, and harsh winters, was both a challenge and a partner in the struggle for survival. In the face of nature's relentless power, the castle adapted in every way it could, blending human ingenuity with the demands of the natural world. The castle's relationship with its environment wasn't one of isolation, but of symbiosis, a mutual struggle for survival, where both the land and the people depended on each other for sustenance and protection. The location of a castle, often perched on a hill or surrounded by rugged terrain, was chosen with survival in mind. The higher the position, the more defensible the castle became, and the more difficult it was for invaders to approach undetected. But this advantageous positioning also had its downsides, particularly when it came to dealing with the weather. A castle situated on a hill was more exposed to the bitter winds of winter, the snow that would drift across the land, and the freezing cold that would settle into every stone and timber. In the summer, these elevated locations could offer some relief from the heat, but the winter months were another matter entirely. The cold, cutting winds would rush down from the mountains, and the snow would pile up in drifts against the castle walls. But even as the elements battered the stone walls, the castle adapted. The structure itself was built to withstand the worst of the weather. The thick, stone walls, while cold, provided a degree of insulation against the outside chill. The windows, narrow and high up in the walls, were designed to protect against the wind while allowing some light to filter into the rooms. The roofs, often covered with thatch or wooden shingles, were sloped to allow the snow to slide off, preventing the weight of accumulated snow from causing damage. But no matter how carefully the castle was designed, the natural world was an ever-present force, and adaptation to the environment became a constant process. One of the most striking ways the castle adapted to its environment was through its reliance on seasonal rhythms. The people within the castle didn't just survive alongside nature, they actively worked with it. The castle's inhabitants understood the cyclical nature of the seasons, and they made their preparations accordingly. In the autumn, when the harvests were abundant, food was gathered and preserved to last through the lean months of winter. Meats were salted or smoked, grains were stored, and fruits were dried or turned into preserves. This was a time of abundance, but it was also a time of foresight, knowing that the harsh winter months would require a stockpile of resources to sustain everyone. The surrounding land also played an essential role in this process. The castle's fields were cultivated in spring and summer, providing the grains and vegetables that were the foundation of the larder. The castle's orchards yielded fruits that could be stored or turned into cider, and the surrounding forests provided timber for building and firewood. The forest was a vital resource, not only for heating the castle but also for providing food. Hunting parties would venture out into the woods, bringing back venison, boar, and wild fowl, adding variety to the diet. Fishing, too, played a role in the castle's adaptation to its environment. Rivers, lakes, or coastal areas provided fish that could be preserved or eaten fresh, adding much-needed protein to the winter meals. But the relationship between the castle and its environment wasn't limited to food and firewood. The castle was built with an acute awareness of its surroundings. Water, perhaps the most vital resource, was never far from the castle's design. Most castles were built near a freshwater source, whether it was a river, lake, or spring, ensuring that the inhabitants had access to water year-round. In times of siege, the availability of water could mean the difference between life and death. But in winter, the freezing of water sources presented its own challenges. The castle's wells, often deep and dug into the stone, might freeze, or the water might become inaccessible due to snow. In these instances, the castle's inhabitants had to rely on stored water, which meant that every drop was precious. The relationship between the castle and its environment was not just one of survival, it was also about managing risk. The natural world, though beautiful, could be a ruthless adversary. In the winter, the landscape around the castle became treacherous, with deep snowdrifts and ice making travel dangerous. The castle's soldiers would keep watch over the surrounding terrain, ready to defend the castle against any threats, whether they came from bandits, enemy forces, or the environment itself. The ice and snow would make movement slow, but it also provided opportunities for those in the castle to prepare. The ground was frozen solid, making it difficult for attackers to tunnel their way into the castle or use siege weapons effectively. The natural world could be a source of danger, but it was also an ally, offering protection through its challenges. The castle's walls, though strong, had to be maintained to endure the constant assault of the weather. In addition to the wind, snow, and rain, the walls of the castle were also vulnerable to erosion. Stone, while durable, could crack over time, especially when subjected to the extremes of heat and cold. The castle's inhabitants, ever vigilant, would maintain the integrity of the walls, ensuring that the structure remained sound and able to withstand the elements. The task was unending. The constant repair of the castle's defenses against the wear and tear of nature was as much a part of the life within the fortress as the fire in the hearth. Beyond the physical challenges of the environment, the castle's inhabitants also had to adapt to the psychological effects of living in such close quarters, particularly during the long, dark winter months. The isolation, the lack of sunlight, and the endless cold could wear down even the strongest of individuals. To combat this, the communal spaces in the castle, the great hall, the kitchens, the hearths, became more than just places to eat or sleep. They were spaces where the people of the castle gathered, shared stories, sang songs, and celebrated whatever little joy the season could bring. The fire became not just a source of warmth but a symbol of resilience, providing light in the darkness and warmth in the coldest of times. The people in the castle understood that surviving the winter was about more than physical resources, it was also about preserving their mental and emotional well-being. The castle's relationship with its environment was also evident in the way it shaped the people within it. living in such close proximity to nature, with its unpredictability and power, instilled a sense of respect for the land. The inhabitants knew that they could not control the weather or the changing seasons, but they could adapt. They could work with the land, use it wisely, and prepare for the worst. It was a constant balancing act, acknowledging the forces of nature while also asserting their own strength and ingenuity. This relationship between the castle and its environment, where human beings sought to coexist with and adapt to the natural world, was the key to the castle's survival. The ability to adapt, to make use of the resources available, to respond to the changing seasons, to endure the challenges of the land, was what allowed the castle to remain a vital force in medieval life. It was a lesson in resilience and ingenuity, a reminder that survival was not just about brute strength but also about the ability to work with nature, to anticipate its challenges, and to find ways to thrive even in the harshest of conditions. In the medieval castle, survival was never an individual endeavor. It was a collective effort, a system of interwoven roles, responsibilities, and relationships that kept the castle's inhabitants alive through the harshest winters. The castle, often isolated from the outside world, was a microcosm of society, a self-sustaining ecosystem where each individual, from the highest lord to the humblest servant, had a role to play in ensuring that life within the castle walls continued. It was within this system of collaboration and community that true survival was found. The winter months, with their biting cold and unyielding darkness, tested the strength of the castle's social fabric, but it was through unity and mutual support that the people of the castle endured. At the heart of the castle's social structure was the lord, the figurehead who held ultimate authority over the land, the people, and the resources. Yet, despite the lord's status and power, the survival of the castle was not solely in their hands. The lord relied heavily on the work of the soldiers, the knights, the servants, the cooks, the blacksmiths, and the many others who made life within the castle possible. Each person, regardless of rank, contributed to the larger effort, often in ways that were invisible to the noble eyes but no less vital. The lord could command, but it was the people who worked together to ensure that the castle functioned smoothly and that survival was achieved. In winter, the sense of community became even more crucial. The isolation of the castle, nestled in a remote location, meant that supplies from the outside world could be scarce, if not impossible to obtain during the coldest months. No trade caravans could travel through the snow, no merchants could offer their goods. The people of the castle were entirely dependent on the resources they had stockpiled and on each other to ensure that they did not fall into starvation or despair. The bonds of unity, trust, and shared responsibility were what allowed them to survive the long, brutal months ahead. The communal nature of survival in the castle was perhaps most evident in the daily tasks that took place around the hearth. The Great Hall, the central gathering place of the castle, was where the community came together, not just to eat, but to collaborate in the most fundamental ways. While the lord and his family sat at the head of the table, surrounded by knights and advisors, the rest of the castle's inhabitants gathered in the same space to partake in the meal and the warmth it provided. The servants, often working behind the scenes, were just as much a part of this communal experience. They may have had separate duties, but they, too, benefited from the warmth of the fire and the comfort of the food. The servants, who were often the unsung heroes of castle life, were indispensable to the functioning of the community. Their work, though unseen by the higher ranks, kept the castle running. They gathered firewood, prepared meals, cleaned, and maintained the castle's various rooms. During the winter, their responsibilities became even more critical. Ensuring the proper storage of food, managing the firewood supply, and maintaining the castle's cleanliness were essential tasks that allowed the entire community to function. The lord's family may have had wealth and power, but it was the servants and workers who kept the fires burning, both literally and figuratively. The knights, too, played a crucial role in the survival of the castle. While they were often tasked with guarding the castle and ensuring its safety from external threats, during winter, their duties also extended to the inner workings of the community. They helped with the defense of the castle's stockpiles, ensuring that no raiders or bandits would be able to steal the precious food and resources that had been so carefully gathered. Additionally, the knights were often expected to participate in the communal work of the castle, helping to chop firewood, maintaining the castle's defenses, or repairing the stone walls that were vulnerable to the harsh weather. The bonds of community and collaboration extended even further to the soldiers, craftsmen, and tradespeople who worked within the castle. The blacksmiths, for example, were essential to the survival of the castle. Their work ensured that weapons, tools, and even cooking implements were in good condition. The blacksmiths also made sure that the fire pits and stoves were functional, providing warmth and food. The carpenters, masons, and other tradespeople were equally important, maintaining and repairing the castle's physical structure. In winter, the constant repairs needed to keep the castle's defenses intact were essential to its survival. The castle was a living, breathing entity, and it required the contributions of each member of the community to thrive. Collaboration was not just about the work that had to be done, it was about the emotional and social support that the people of the castle gave each other during the long winter months. The isolation of the castle could lead to feelings of loneliness and despair. The cold, the darkness, and the uncertainty of survival could weigh heavily on the minds of even the most stalwart of individuals. But the bonds of community helped to mitigate these challenges. The Great Hall was a place of refuge, a place where people gathered to share food, drink, stories, and laughter. The fireside gatherings were not just about the warmth of the fire, but about the warmth of human connection. The shared experience of enduring the winter together created a sense of camaraderie that transcended class and rank. For the children in the castle, the community and collaboration were perhaps most evident in the way they were raised. The children of the castle, whether they were noble or servant, grew up in a world where cooperation was essential to survival. The children learned the value of hard work from a young age, whether it was helping to gather firewood, feeding the animals, or assisting in the kitchen. But they also learned the importance of mutual respect and trust. In the castle, everyone had a role to play, and from the lord's children to the servants' children, they were all part of the larger community that made survival possible. Even when times were hardest, when food was scarce and the weather showed no mercy, the people of the castle found ways to support each other. A shared meal, a word of encouragement, or the simple act of sitting together by the fire could lift spirits and renew hope. It was this sense of collective responsibility and unity that allowed the castle's inhabitants to endure the hardships of winter. Each individual's contributions, no matter how small, were vital to the survival of the community. The lord and his family might have been the leaders, but it was the collective effort of the entire community that made life in the castle sustainable. The castle, in many ways, was a reflection of the world outside, one where survival was never guaranteed, but where cooperation and unity offered the best chance of enduring the challenges that came. In the face of the cold, the isolation, and the dangers of winter, the castle's inhabitants learned that they were stronger together. They faced the harsh elements as a team, relying on each other to maintain the fires, to guard the walls, and to ensure that food and warmth were never out of reach. In the end, it was the shared experience of working together that allowed the people of the castle to survive the coldest, darkest days of winter. Unity, collaboration, and community were not just the foundations of survival in the castle, they were the essence of what made the castle a place where life, despite all odds, could endure. The psychological resilience of the inhabitants of the medieval castle was as critical to their survival as the physical resources of fire, food, and stone. As the cold winter months stretched on, with the castle often isolated from the outside world by snow and ice, it was not only the body that had to endure, but also the mind and spirit. The harshness of the environment, the isolation, and the constant uncertainty created a psychological burden that could easily overwhelm even the strongest of individuals. But within the castle walls, the people found ways to adapt, to cope, and, ultimately, to endure. The castle, as a physical structure, was a fortress against the elements, but it was the strength of the people within, their mental fortitude, and their ability to support one another that made it a sanctuary of survival during the darkest days of winter. In a time when death from illness, injury, or starvation was always just a step away, the psychological toll of winter was profound. The cold, the long nights, and the oppressive isolation could erode a person's sense of well-being. It was not uncommon for the harsh weather to induce feelings of hopelessness, depression, or even despair. The castle's inhabitants, whether they were the noble family or the lowliest servant, were all affected by this psychological pressure. Yet, despite these challenges, they found ways to persevere, relying on their resilience and the support of those around them to maintain their mental health. One of the most significant sources of psychological resilience came from the sense of community within the castle. Living in such a confined space with so many others could lead to tensions, but it was also a source of strength. The people of the castle understood that survival depended not just on the physical resources they had, but on their ability to come together, to share experiences, and to support one another through the long winter months. The communal gatherings in the Great Hall, where everyone, whether noble or servant, shared food, stories, and warmth, were vital to maintaining morale. These gatherings helped to alleviate the isolation that could easily take hold in the winter months. The fire, crackling in the hearth, became more than just a source of warmth. It was a beacon of connection, a place where people could come together to share their hopes, fears, and dreams. For the nobles, the mental strain of the winter months was often less visible but just as real. The lords and ladies of the castle, though insulated from the physical labor of survival, carried their own burdens. Their responsibilities to their people, the management of the castle's resources, and the constant worry over potential threats from outside could weigh heavily on their minds. In many ways, the psychological resilience of the noble class was tied to their sense of duty. They understood that they were the guardians of the castle, the ones responsible for ensuring that everyone within its walls survived. This sense of responsibility gave them a sense of purpose, a reason to keep going even when the cold seemed unbearable. Yet, it was also a source of anxiety, as the lord and his family had to balance the needs of the castle's inhabitants with the harsh realities of limited resources. For the soldiers and knights, the winter months were a time of heightened vigilance and fatigue. These men, who were accustomed to the constant demands of defending the castle, now had to contend with the psychological strain of being isolated in the fortress, with little opportunity for respite. The constant threat of raids, the knowledge that the castle might be vulnerable in the winter months, weighed on them heavily. But these men were trained for resilience. Their discipline, their sense of duty, and their bond with each other created a strong psychological foundation that helped them endure. The camaraderie between soldiers, their shared experiences of battle and survival, gave them a sense of purpose and unity. They knew that they were not alone in their struggles, and that mutual support was essential to getting through the toughest of times. For the servants and lower-ranking individuals in the castle, life in the winter months was often grueling and isolating. Though they did not face the same pressures as the noble family or the knights, the physical demands of their work, combined with the psychological toll of isolation, could be overwhelming. The servants, responsible for everything from gathering firewood to preparing food, were often the ones who worked the hardest and received the least recognition. Yet, their resilience was no less remarkable. For many, the sense of camaraderie with their fellow workers was the key to maintaining their mental strength. Despite the hardships, they found moments of joy and comfort in shared experiences, in the knowledge that their work was vital to the survival of everyone in the castle. Their bonds with each other, forged through years of shared labor, created a psychological resilience that allowed them to face the winter's challenges with determination. One of the most fascinating aspects of the psychological resilience in the castle was how the people coped with the isolation. Medieval castles were often located in remote areas, far from the towns and villages where the majority of people lived. In winter, with roads impassable due to snow and the outside world effectively cut off, the castle became an island unto itself. The lack of contact with the outside world could be a source of great psychological strain. But the people of the castle adapted to this isolation. The long winter nights, while dark and cold, were also a time for introspection, for storytelling, and for bonding. The isolation allowed the people within the castle to focus inward, to strengthen their relationships with one another, and to draw closer as a community. The isolation was not always a negative force. It was a time for personal reflection, for rebuilding inner strength, and for deepening the emotional connections that made the castle a place of survival. In some ways, the castle itself played a psychological role in the resilience of its inhabitants. The very structure of the castle, with its towering stone walls and imposing presence, provided a sense of security. The castle was a fortress, a place where people could take refuge from the dangers of the outside world. Though the walls could be cold and uninviting, they also symbolized safety and protection. The castle's ability to withstand the harshest storms and most brutal winters became a metaphor for the resilience of its people. The psychological effect of living in such a place, where survival was not only possible but expected, was profound. The castle was more than just a physical space. It was a mental refuge, a place where the inhabitants could find strength in the face of adversity. The winter months also provided an opportunity for the inhabitants of the castle to practice mental resilience. The physical hardships they endured, the cold, the long nights, the scarcity of resources, were mirrored by the psychological challenges they faced. Yet, these challenges were also a form of training. The more the people of the castle endured, the stronger they became mentally. The struggle against the elements, the fight to survive, was not just a physical battle. It was a mental one. Every day that they managed to survive, every winter night that they endured, was a victory. And with each victory, their resilience grew. The psychological resilience of the castle's inhabitants was not an innate trait but a learned skill, one that was honed over time through hardship, collaboration, and the sheer force of will. It was a strength that was built through the shared experience of survival, through the recognition that everyone within the castle played a role in keeping the community alive. From the highest lord to the lowest servant, each person contributed to the mental fortitude that allowed the castle to withstand the toughest winters. It was a lesson in the power of the human spirit, a reminder that even in the face of the harshest conditions, people could endure, adapt, and emerge stronger. The castle's true strength lay not just in its walls, but in the resilience of those who lived within them. As the winter months draped their cold mantle over the land, the medieval castle became more than just a fortress of stone and fire. It transformed into a place where spiritual life intertwined with the daily struggle for survival. In times of hardship, when the snow piled high and the nights stretched endlessly, the spiritual and religious practices of the castle's inhabitants offered them solace, guidance, and strength. The presence of faith, whether through prayer, rituals, or the sanctity of the church, provided a psychological and emotional lifeline, offering a sense of hope, purpose, and connection to something greater than the immediate physical world. While fire kept them warm, food nourished their bodies, and stone shielded them from the elements, it was faith and spirituality that often sustained their hearts and minds. The church, or chapel, within the castle was not just a place for religious ceremonies. It was a spiritual sanctuary, especially during the long, dark winter days. In a world where survival was often precarious, where the cold could claim lives and illness could spread quickly, the castle's chapel offered both physical and psychological protection. The sacred space within the stone walls was a place of refuge where individuals could find peace, solace, and an escape from the harshness of their daily lives. For the inhabitants of the castle, the church was a reminder that there was more to life than mere survival. It was a space where the soul could be nurtured, even amidst the brutality of nature. The role of the clergy, often an integral part of castle life, became especially important during the winter months. In times of adversity, the clergy provided spiritual counsel, guidance, and comfort to the people of the castle. The priest or bishop, with their wisdom and knowledge of the scriptures, would hold masses and prayers, leading the community in moments of collective reflection and worship. These services, held within the warm, candle-lit walls of the chapel, were more than just religious observances. They were moments of collective strength, where the people came together to pray not just for protection from external threats, but also for emotional resilience in the face of the harsh winter. The communal aspect of worship, whether it was the shared prayer or the collective singing of hymns, reinforced the sense of unity and shared purpose within the castle. In addition to communal worship, personal acts of devotion played a key role in the spiritual lives of the castle's inhabitants. For the lord and his family, daily prayers or private rituals were not only acts of faith but also expressions of their responsibility as the guardians of the castle and their people. It was believed that the Lord's soul was bound to the welfare of his lands and people, and that his personal spiritual devotion could have a direct impact on the well-being of the castle itself. The Lord, whether through personal reflection or participation in communal prayer, sought to align themselves with divine forces, asking for guidance and protection. During the winter months, with the cold pressing down on the castle's walls and the dangers of starvation or disease ever present, the lords' faith became a symbol of their strength and determination, a source of stability for those under their care. The castle's inhabitants, regardless of their rank, sought refuge in faith during the darkest of times. The servants, often at the bottom of the social hierarchy, would attend church services to seek divine protection from the harsh winter elements. For many of these lower-ranking individuals, the cold and isolation of winter could seem like an insurmountable challenge. Yet, their faith in the church, in the clergy, and in God provided a sense of comfort, giving them a belief that they were not alone in their struggles. Prayer, whether silent or spoken aloud, became a daily ritual, a way to offer their fears, hopes, and desires to a higher power. The simple act of lighting a candle, offering a prayer, or kneeling in the chapel was a spiritual practice that could bring them inner peace, even in the midst of hardship. Even in the midst of such trials, the belief in divine intervention offered a flicker of hope. The medieval worldview was heavily shaped by the belief in a higher power that governed the natural and human realms. The people of the castle lived in constant awareness of their dependence on this divine order. The long winter nights, with their frozen landscapes and relentless storms, were reminders of the fragility of human life. But it was also during these times that faith flourished. The belief that prayer could stave off disaster, that God could intervene in times of crisis, gave the castle's inhabitants the strength to endure the cold and isolation. The rituals, prayers, and sacrifices performed within the chapel were all expressions of this belief in divine power. People would offer prayers for protection from illness, for good harvests in the spring, or for relief from the suffering caused by the harsh winter. The clergy's role extended beyond the chapel itself. They were often consulted for guidance on practical matters, such as whether to take certain actions in response to a particularly severe winter, or whether the Lord should give alms to the poor. Their spiritual authority influenced decisions in the day-to-day running of the castle, providing a moral compass that could help guide even the harshest of actions. During times of hardship, the clergy reminded the people of the importance of charity, of showing compassion to others, and of the divine rewards for those who helped their fellow man. The practice of giving alms, whether in the form of food, clothing, or firewood, was deeply tied to the spiritual ethos of the time. Even in the midst of winter's most unforgiving moments, the clergy encouraged the nobles and those with resources to look after the poor, reinforcing the idea that spiritual salvation came not just from personal devotion but also from acts of kindness and generosity. The impact of faith extended beyond the walls of the chapel. Superstition and belief in omens were also prevalent in the everyday lives of the castle's inhabitants. The harsh winter, with its unpredictable storms and dark nights, was a time when these beliefs came to the forefront. In some cases, people believed that the weather itself was a sign of divine favor or wrath. A particularly harsh winter might be interpreted as punishment for some moral failing, while a mild season might be seen as a sign of God's grace. These beliefs were often reinforced by the clergy, who might interpret the events of nature as messages from God. Even those who were not devout practitioners of religion found comfort in the belief that the cold and snow were part of a divine plan, a natural cycle over which they had no control but that ultimately had meaning and purpose. Rituals and festivals also played a significant role in the spiritual life of the castle during the winter months. Christmas, with its message of hope and renewal, was a particularly important celebration. Though the winter months were a time of scarcity, the arrival of Christmas was a time when the castle's inhabitants could come together in celebration, offering thanks for survival and hoping for better days ahead. The church would host special masses, and the community would gather to celebrate the birth of Christ, finding in it a symbol of new life and spiritual rebirth even in the depths of winter. This communal expression of faith, where both high and low ranks could come together in worship, reinforced the idea that faith was a unifying force, transcending the hardships of winter and uniting the people of the castle in their shared devotion. The spirituality of the castle was not limited to religious observances alone. It was integrated into every aspect of life, from the way people viewed the natural world to the way they approached hardship. The belief in divine protection, in the power of prayer, and in the sanctity of the land and its resources gave the castle's inhabitants the strength to face the difficulties of winter. While fire kept their bodies warm, food sustained them, and stone protected them, it was their faith that gave them the strength to endure the unrelenting winter months. The spiritual dimensions of castle life during winter were not just about the afterlife, but about finding meaning, comfort, and resilience in the midst of the harshest challenges that life could throw at them. Winter, with its biting cold and relentless storms, was not just a time for the people of the medieval castle to survive in isolation, it was also a time when the defense of the castle became more crucial than ever. The harsh conditions of winter presented both unique challenges and opportunities for those charged with the castle's protection. In an age when warfare was often fought with physical strength, cunning strategies, and direct confrontation, the cold months tested the resilience and ingenuity of the defenders. The winter brought with it a host of new risks, from food shortages to disease, and those inside the castle walls had to be vigilant and prepared to defend not just against invaders, but against the very elements themselves. The bitter winter winds could freeze the moats and streams that surrounded many castles, giving attackers the rare opportunity to approach the fortress without fear of drowning or being shot at from high walls. As snow blanketed the land, it could obscure the movements of enemy forces, making it easier for raiders or rival factions to creep close to the castle's walls, ready to strike. The cold and snow, though often thought of as obstacles to human movement, became tools for those who sought to breach the defenses of the castle. For the soldiers inside, the winter months demanded that they be even more alert, more resourceful, and more resilient. The castle's outer defenses, often designed to withstand siege weapons and direct assault, were less suited to defending against the more subtle threats posed by winter conditions. The walls, made of stone and brick, could become treacherous when coated in ice and snow. The paths leading to the castle gates, usually muddy or packed dirt, became slippery and dangerous. The ice made it more difficult to maneuver horses, carts, and soldiers, while the snow made it easier for attackers to conceal their movements. In winter, the castle's defenses had to be adjusted and adapted. The outer gates, once an effective deterrent, might freeze shut, creating obstacles for those inside as well as those outside. Yet, the castle's defenders adapted quickly to these new realities. The soldiers who manned the towers, the battlements, and the gates had to adjust their routines to deal with the extreme cold. The watchmen who stood guard in the freezing cold hours of the night would don extra layers of clothing to combat the chill, and their vigilance would be heightened. The towers themselves, with their high vantage points, became essential for spotting any signs of movement on the horizon, whether it was the approach of an enemy force or an unusual activity in the surrounding landscape. It was often during the long, dark nights of winter that the sentries' sharp eyes and calm minds became the first line of defense against both human and natural threats. The soldiers stationed within the castle also had to prepare for the possibility of siege during the winter. While winter might deter most would-be invaders, there were still those who would seize the opportunity to attack when the resources of a castle were most vulnerable. A well-prepared castle, though, had its stockpiles and reserves to withstand a prolonged siege. The defenders knew that, while food and firewood were stored away for the cold months, they had to be prepared to last through even the worst of sieges. The food supplies were carefully rationed, and the castle's inhabitants had to be prepared for the possibility of being cut off from the outside world. The castle's soldiers were often tasked with ensuring that the reserves were guarded and that the gates were kept secure. Though the winter months brought additional challenges, the fortress became even more of a sanctuary in such times. The walls, thick and high, were built not only to withstand the threat of arrows and siege weapons but also to keep out the cold and the encroaching darkness. During the winter, the defensive role of the castle was also tied to the natural environment. The surrounding forest, which might provide firewood or timber in warmer months, became a strategic asset in the winter. It was during this time that ambushes or small skirmishes could occur, as the snow-covered trees provided the perfect cover for an attacker. For this reason, those within the castle would often keep an eye on the surrounding woods, especially at night when visibility was limited. The sound of breaking twigs, the rustle of snow underfoot, these subtle signs could indicate the approach of an enemy. The soldiers stationed in the castle's watchtowers had to be trained to recognize these signs, understanding that even the smallest disturbance in the otherwise still landscape could be a sign of impending danger. In addition to the physical challenges of defending the castle during winter, there were also psychological pressures to contend with. Winter brought about a sense of isolation and tension within the walls. The long nights and the constant threat of hunger or disease could wear on the mental health of the defenders. The castle's soldiers, though trained to withstand physical and emotional stress, often found themselves dealing with the mental strain of prolonged isolation. The cold seeped into their bones, and the dark, gloomy days could make even the most experienced warrior feel trapped. As the winter dragged on, the defenders had to remain vigilant, not just for the physical threats, but also for the mental challenges that came with it. They had to find ways to stay focused, to support each other, and to maintain their resolve when every day seemed colder, darker, and longer. In some castles, the winter months also saw the arrival of reinforcements or allies. While most travel would slow to a halt due to the snow and ice, there were still opportunities for strategic alliances or reinforcements to arrive when least expected. These seasonal alliances were critical for the survival of the castle and its defenders. A convoy of soldiers or supplies arriving during the cold months could be a lifeline for the castle. At the same time, defenders had to prepare for the possibility that they might be forced to defend without reinforcements, relying solely on their resourcefulness and the resources within the castle walls. As the days grew shorter and the nights longer, the soldiers within the castle had to rely on their training and discipline to maintain order and readiness. Their weapons, whether swords, pikes, or bows, had to be kept sharp and ready at all times. The weapons would often need maintenance during the cold months, as the humidity and frost could wear down metal and timber. Soldiers would spend time keeping their armor in good condition, making sure it was both functional and protective. The constant upkeep of their gear, even in the face of cold, was a reminder that the defense of the castle was never over. It was a continuous task that required attention, dedication, and a relentless focus on survival. Winter warfare was not only about defending the physical structure of the castle, it was about maintaining the morale of the people within it. The soldiers knew that the winter months tested more than just their physical endurance. It tested their spirit. They understood that they were not just defending the walls from external threats, but from the psychological and emotional strain of winter. The battle against the cold, the isolation, and the uncertainty of the season was just as important as any clash with an enemy army. To keep the morale high, soldiers would often share stories around the fire, hold contests or games to pass the time, and encourage one another to stay strong. Though they were isolated in the coldest of seasons, they found ways to create a sense of camaraderie and unity that would sustain them until spring. The defense of the castle during winter, therefore, was a multifaceted effort, one that required not just strategic thinking and physical preparation, but also mental resilience, teamwork, and a strong sense of purpose. The defenders, though facing some of the harshest conditions imaginable, knew that their ability to adapt to the changing environment, to maintain their vigilance, and to support each other would determine their success. In the cold grip of winter, the castle was more than just a building of stone and wood. It was a symbol of endurance, a place where the forces of nature could be resisted through human strength, unity, and unwavering determination.